Sometimes you'll go back to a game you haven't played in years, one that you used to enjoy, and maybe you'll find that time has not been kind to that game, or worse, that it was never good and you just put up with it because you were a stupid kid that didn't know any better. But it's rare for someone to take another look once a game has been written off. Largely when something sucks, you'll want to take any chance of enjoyment elsewhere. The game I had this experience with recently was, of course by the title of this video, Sonic 3D Blast. Loved it as a kid, like all things Sonic, but when I came back once I was older, I found that it was slow, dodgy, and not very fun. Of course, this was only the Genesis version. Despite being the same game, and on many accounts it is, the Saturn edition warrants enough changes to give the game a look. Released in 1996, mere weeks after the Genesis counterpart, Sonic 3D Blast was commissioned to replace the ill-fated Sonic Extreme, the title that was supposed to push the Saturn in the West. Due to a slew of development issues, Extreme was cancelled, and 3D Blast took its place for the '96 holiday season. The game was fairly successful, but not quite the groundbreaking Sonic title fans and critics alike had hoped for. If you're even remotely familiar with Sonic, you'll notice this game has a pretty significant difference compared to most: the isometric look from which the game is played. Instead of just getting to the goal, Sonic has to defeat all 5 badniks in an area, collect the flickies contained within each, and escort them to the goal ring. Doing so opens up a gateway that shoots Sonic to the next section of the stage, and eventually to the exit. Each level is fairly maze-like, though the badniks and subsequently flickies are never hard to find. Each zone has a different gimmick, though most play out the same. Find the badniks, smash them, collect your bird friends, and go. There are other obstacles along the way, though the challenge lies more in the issues with the isometric perspective rather than being difficult themselves. The depth perception here makes timing jumps fairly difficult in some of the more platform-heavy stages. There's some platforms that are exceedingly small, and it feels like Sonic can't quite land on them like you want him to. In a lot of cases, these can be skipped entirely with a skillful long jump, but times that you have to use the trampolines to get up a steep hill can be a real pain. In place of normal sprites are pre-rendered models, a similar technique used in Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo. 3D Blast looks far better on the Saturn than the Genesis. There's plenty more character to every level, as well as small details that make each act burst with life. Rusty Ruins has small tiles that shift as Sonic runs over them, while Diamond Dust Zone has frozen, fossilized dinosaur bones embedded into the walls. The levels really pop and have a true sense of identity to each one. Sonic himself looks pretty great, with some cool looking sprites that accompany the gimmicks of each zone, my personal favorite being the spinning sprite from Rusty Ruins. Something about the way he's spinning looks so neat, and if it weren't for another Sonic character, Espio, actually having this move in his repertoire, I'd say it'd need to be used in a later game. The Saturn soundtrack is stunning. Several tracks in this game sound as though they'd never be from a Sonic the Hedgehog title, and don't get it twisted, that's not a complaint. The amount of variety between each accompaniment is phenomenal, and it isn't afraid to take the CD capabilities of the SEGA Saturn as far as it can. Rusty Ruins again sticks out. The use of the choir and piano is spot on, creating a track that's both parts comfy yet foreboding. And of course, there's the special stage music, which helps drive home the sense of speed for the race you're partaking in. Speaking of the special stages, you'd be forgiven for thinking the following statement is lunacy, but they alone make this game worth playing. Unlike the PC and Genesis versions, the set here are completely unique and were actually developed by Sonic Team. The rest of the game was developed by Traveler's Tales. Up until Mania, this was the king of collecting Chaos Emeralds. They start slow, in a manner of speaking, demonstrating what looks more like a true 3D version of the special stages from Sonic 2. As you progress further, new elements are introduced, like platforms, jumps, springs, and so much more. Unlike previous games in the series where the special stages felt largely disconnected from the overall package, Sonic 3D Blast manages a clear sense of cohesion between the two. Now that we have Sonic Mania, that's easily a top contender for the best Emerald Collection levels in any Sonic game ever. But even with that, 3D Blast remains among the best in the entire series. Of course, getting to them is where things get vastly different. Instead of hitting a checkpoint or a ring at the end of a stage, players have to find either Tails or Knuckles within any act, both of whom are hidden somewhere within each stage once apiece. Why it requires 50 of your precious rings to get them to whisk you away, and even more baffling, why they take all the rings you're holding, like more than what they actually need is beyond me. But in any case, they're the ones who get Sonic out of his pre-rendered rags and popping into the glorious low-poly wonder that is this game's special stages. Perhaps the biggest irony of 3D Blast, beyond the name itself of course, being that the majority of the game isn't 3D, but let's not get into that, is that despite being a Sonic the Hedgehog game, it isn't particularly fast. In most cases, Sonic sort of plods along quickly, but never at any breakneck speeds. Part of this is due to the speed cap, which, seeing the size of the levels, was definitely needed, but it's also due to the angle the game plays. There's something about how the isometric angle that downplays Sonic's speed, yet enhances the lack thereof. It's not a total detriment to get rid of the mock pace the series is known for, but the omission is notable from the beginning. Almost every section in this game that does pick up the momentum is automated, a sort of premonition into the series' future. That being said, once you've got the odd layout down pat and straightened out with the controls, which will happen much quicker with a Saturn 3D pad, 3D Blast is a lot of fun to play. There's a lot of clever secrets hidden within the game, some in plain sight that are easy to miss given the game taking advantage of being isometric and also how the scenery works. There are no pits, and instant kills are fairly rare here, which works to the player's advantage and makes the hard-to-time jumps we discussed earlier easier to look past. In my time with the game, there was only one thing I found that bothered me, and that was the goal of the entire game: collecting flickies. Now, this is the common complaint with the game, but it's not the collecting aspect that bothers me, nor is it that your feathered friends scramble when Sonic hits. No, my issue with the little peckers is having their own hitboxes and what that means for you. See, in the later levels, a lot of obstacles are only going to hit you if you're going slow. Even at the lowered sense of speed, Sonic is typically fast enough to dodge anything coming his way. The trouble is that every flicky you collect trails behind Sonic, with a total of 5 per each section of the act. Now, on one hand, it's kinda neat, since the flickies can be used to collect medals that are higher than Sonic can reach on springs. But that's not enough when they're trailing behind, get hit, and then scatter. This causes the player to go back, quickly grab them, which varies how close you have to be on each from each type of flicky, and likely you'll take damage yourself in the process. There are sections that are very trap heavy, and if you lose any of these little fledglings in one of these sections, good luck getting them back. This seems like a dramatic oversight for what could be kind of an interesting mechanic. If the flickies weren't required to progress, it might make a little bit more sense, but seeing as you have to have all 5 to continue, you've got to get these suckers sorted. To give each flicky their own little sense of personality, there's 4 different kinds. The blue flicky tends to be the best. Even when lost, they seem to make at least some effort to get back to Sonic. The pink are about the same as the blue at most, but the green and red are just little bastards. The red jumps in a somewhat high arc and will change direction on a whim. At times, it seems like they're purposely avoiding the player, which presents a huge problem in situations like we just talked about. And finally is the fat green flickies. I'm convinced they are programmed to stick to the edges of the stages, many of which have green foliage as decoration for them to hide behind, and make a point to wander as far as they can from Sonic. The very least, the Saturn game does have a map on the pause screen for players to try to track down a flicky if it gets left behind, but the maps aren't exactly helpful and are oftentimes useless. While in my most recent playthrough, I didn't have trouble losing any flickies to the point that I was soft-locked in the game, but I can recall long ago in the Genesis game where that did happen. It's something to be aware of and is a double-edged sword. You're not just losing rings when you take damage, you're letting the entire goal of the game slip through your fingers. After all these years, I can safely say that Sonic 3D Blast is far from a perfect game. It has numerous faults, some way worse than others, and at times, it doesn't even feel anything remotely like a Sonic game. And yet, that's not exactly a bad thing. The unique special stages are seriously worth checking this game out alone, and while the base game, even with its drawbacks, is still quite a bit of fun. I'd be remiss not to mention last year's patch of the Genesis game from Traveler Tales' founder and the program of the Genesis title's original, John Burton. Burton released the Director's Cut, which includes a variety of new features, such as an overworld map, a password system, tighter controls, and much more. These changes do make for a much more enjoyable experience on Sega's Nintendo toppling Titan, and for many, this is the definitive way to play the game. If you can't secure a copy of Sonic 3D Blast on the Saturn, heck, I'd recommend checking it out either way. But for me, the numerous extras of the Saturn just can't be beat. And as crazy as it sounds that just a small part of a game can make a world of difference, you'll understand when you get your hands on it.